In the beginning, the god Osiris ruled over all of Egypt along with his queen Isis, who was also his sister. Fun fact, this is where the tradition of pharaohs marrying their siblings came from. Osiris had a brother named Set who really hated him, and we're not really sure why. There's lots of different stories. One says it might be because Osiris kicked Set once upon a time and that made him very angry. It might be because Osiris seduced Nephthys, who is Set's wife, or it might just be because Set is the god of chaos and Osiris represents order and all that is good in the world. Set would love to dethrone Osiris and become the pharaoh of all Egypt, but he can't because his sister Isis is just too smart and too watchful. So Set instead decides to hatch a very elaborate plan to dethrone his brother and take power for himself. Set's plan is complicated, but it's also a pretty great plan. He sneaks into his brother's house late at night and measures him very carefully. He then creates a box that ends up looking like a sarcophagus that fits his brother's measurements perfectly. Set's dastardly plan kicks into gear when his brother comes home from spreading peace and prosperity all over Egypt. Set decides to throw him a giant party with tons of alcohol and dancing ladies and a box that if you fit into it perfectly, you get to keep. So Set has all of his friends who are in on his plan try to get into the box. None of them quite fit. They're too long, they're too short, they're too fat, they're too skinny, and then finally they convince a slightly tipsy Osiris to try out the box for himself. Surprise, surprise, he fits perfectly, so Set slams it shut, seals it, and drops it in the Nile. Isis is heartbroken at the death of her husband and goes to try and find him. Eventually, she finds the box in the Nile, and Osiris is dead and drowned inside. She removes his body with the thought that she can perform a ritual to guide him into the afterlife later. She hides it in some reeds so that Set can't find it. Sadly, Set is pretty detail-oriented, and he goes to check to make sure that Osiris is really dead. He finds the empty box, and then he goes looking for the body and finds it. He is very angry about this, so he cuts the body into 14 different pieces and scatters it all across Egypt. He then becomes pharaoh and rules the land in Osiris' stead. Isis and her sister Nephthys decide to hunt down all of the pieces, and they end up finding all but one, which just happens to be Osiris' penis, which sadly got eaten by a fish. Once she has all the pieces, Isis enlists Thoth and Anubis' help, and she decides to sew the body back together, wraps Osiris in linens, and then with some very, very powerful magic on a moonlit night, brings him back to life. Once alive and mostly whole again, Osiris hugs his sister/wife, thanks her for saving him, but then informs her that he can't stay in the land of the living because he's dead, and that he's gonna have to go become king of the afterlife. He also tells her not to worry, however, because in this slight time that he's been alive, he has managed to impregnate Isis, and that her son, Horus, is going to defeat Set, save all the Egyptians, and take Osiris' rightful place as pharaoh. Once Isis' son, Horus, is born, he is hidden away on an island and spends most of his young life getting super ripped and yoked so that he can fight his uncle Set and take his place as pharaoh. He ends up fighting Set, loses an eye, but he emerges victorious. In some versions of this myth, there actually has to be a kind of committee that is converged to decide whether or not Set or Horus is supposed to be the true leader of Egypt, but both stories end in the same way, with Set banished from Egypt for forever, and Horus rightfully ruling Egypt, and his father ruling in the underworld. Alright guys, that's everything for me. Remember, it's not ancient mythology if somebody's genitals don't get severed. Hope you enjoyed the story.